Hello and welcome everybody to another eLearning Network webinar, and I'm delighted to have John Curran here. John is a learning architect. He runs Designed Learning, and is that the name of your company, John? Designed Learning?
Designed for Learning.
Designed for Learning. Yes, I was reading out your Twitter handle. Silly me. John is going to talk about brain-friendly e-learning. Just a word of kind of housekeeping. I've done a quick poll initially here just to check on membership. If you're not a member, and these are open to everybody, it's just £29 to join for the year. And actually, as a not-for-profit, we think that's very good value. We're running a number of drop-in sessions, and you can find out more about that on our website. So we hope to see more of you in those. Right, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John now and mute myself.
Thanks, Joan. So just checking everybody can hear me okay, and that they can see my slide deck. So brain-friendly e-learning. Is that everybody seeing that okay? If you do have any problems, just type into the chat window. I'm sure Joan will keep an eye on that, or I'll also try and keep an eye on it. Good. Okay. So as Joan said, I'm well, I've been named various things. So I started out, well, I won't go back too far. But effectively, I was an instructor designer. I worked with Sponge for quite a few years. Then we became learning designers. So now I call myself a learning architect, or probably more properly, a digital learning architect. So I'm here to I'm here to talk to you a bit about well, some of the latest developments in cognitive neuroscience and how they might apply to people like me, and hopefully like you, may be tasked with designing some learning. So basically, I'm going to dive into the brain and see a bit about what we can learn about from cognitive neuroscience about how the brain works. Now, I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist. I'm a learning designer. So this is some things research I've been doing, some books I've been reading, which I'll share at the end. So I'm not an expert on cognitive neuroscience, but I think what the research that's currently going on in the area is really important to help us as learning designers. I brought my spare brain along, so we'll have a look at that later on in the talk. Good. Okay. So yeah. So I run a consultancy called Design for Learning. So I work with lots of different companies, small and large, on helping them design learning, looking at learning management systems, and also run courses on. So I teach a one-day instructional design course. And I also teach people on the authoring tools, things like Rise and Storyline and Evolve. So yeah, I'm really keen to know how we can design better learning. And my company is called Design for Learning, because I don't believe you can design learning itself. People learn. All we can do is design something that facilitates learning. So I prefer to talk about designing learning interventions. So I often at the door. I often talk about designing learning. Sorry, I always start my presentations with this slide, and sadly, I think a lot of my clients think learning is still like this. You have a whole load of content. So there's the guy top right pushing all the content, the subject matter expert, saying they need to learn all this stuff, and there's me, the learning designer, trying to turn the wheel. That machine is the LMS. And the view is that whatever we put in the machine will go into people's heads, but in practice is learning like this? No, it really isn't. In fact, what's actually happening is most of that information is going in one ear and out the other. There's one guy in the back row looking out the window, so he's not very committed to the learning. But a lot of my clients still think that you can actually almost inject learning into people's heads. Sadly, it isn't like that. Learning is much more experiential, especially workplace learning. So I'm talking about teaching people how to do stuff in the workplace. So generally people learn by doing. And so I'm a big fan of Kolb's cycle of experiential learning. So you try something, you did it maybe not very well. You think, well, what could I do to make that? It could have gone better. And then you say, well, what could I change? So that's the conceptualizing. So what can I do to make that better? And then you plan to do it differently, and you work around that again. So in some ways, I like to see it as almost like a spiral staircase, and you continue to go around that loop. until you've mastered something. So learning is much more messy than just injecting stuff into people's heads. I mean, that might change in the future. You know, we might be able to have some sort of matrix type thing, or inject a chip into people's heads that will teach them all they need to know about instructional design. I hope that'll be after I've retired. But yeah, so who knows in the future? But I still think it'll be quite messy even in the future. So what does guide, if we're designing learning, what does guide how we design learning? Well, in the past, there have been lots and lots of different theories of learning and how people learn, pedagogy, all those different things that we've used, Kolb, Gagny, Bloom, they've all contributed to ideas about how people learn. I mean, they are theories, so they're not, you know, they've usually done some research and they've tested it out, but they're ideas to help us to design better learning. They aren't necessarily real world reflection of the real world and how people actually really learn. Nevertheless, learning theories are useful for us as learning designers. But before I go on and start talking about the brain, I just want to quickly look at, well, what is it when we're talking about learning? What do we mean by learning? And one thing I think that a lot of clients sort of get mixed up with is whether we're trying to teach people knowledge, what we call semantic knowledge, whether we're trying to teach some skills, what we call procedural knowledge, or whether we're trying to teach some behaviors and attitudes. In practice, in my view, we're often trying to do all three, but it's really important, I think, as a learning designer, to delineate, you know, how much of each is involved in something you've been asked to do, because then how you approach the learning design depends on what elements of these we're going to use. So if I use an example, so Georgia has a new job as a cleaner in a hospital. So what do you think? So what do you think we're going to focus on? So do you think she needs to be taught knowledge, skills, or behaviors? So you just like type into the chat window. So you know you've got Georgia as your new employee. She's going to be a cleaner in your hospital. What sort of things do you think you're going to need to teach Georgia? Just type into the chat window. Okay, Rachel, all, Andrew, all, Kim, all three. Good. Oh, well done. Skills, Tracy. Yes, good. Okay, all of them. I'd agree, all of them. But let's see. Well, why that matters. So first of all, what does Georgia need to learn? Well, she may need some knowledge. So she probably needs to know a little bit about the things she's up against. So in a hospital setting, the sort of bugs and things, that the germs that can cause big issues in hospitals. So she probably needs to know a little bit about those and maybe about the different transmission routes. Now she doesn't need to know that in order to write an academic paper. She needs to know that in order then to apply some skills. So for example, one of the skills might be hand washing. So I mean, you could just say, well, she doesn't need to know any knowledge. Let's just teach her how to hand wash properly, and that's fine. But actually, it does help sometimes to understand why you're hand washing, and specifically the type of hand washing you're doing. For example, with this COVID-19 virus, now early on, the big thing was wash your hands. And one of the reasons they were saying that was that the virus has a sort of fat layer around it in the environment. It's that fat layer that keeps the virus alive. So actually, when you wash your hands with soap and water, it destroys the fat layer and the virus dies. You don't even need antibacterial soap. The soap in itself that destroys the fat layer. So it's a good example where skills and knowledge are sort of tied up. The final thing, though, behaviors and attitudes, that's more tricky. So will Georgia actually bother to wash her hands between patients and between changing things? That's a much more challenging thing to do. And that's just not to do with what she knows or behaves, but also to do with her environment. So changing behaviors and attitudes in e-learning is a much more challenging thing to do. Although I think when I meet clients, they sort of think it's fairly easy. They almost get the idea by giving her the right knowledge, it'll change the behavior. In practice, it's much tougher than that. Good. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the human learning machine and why it's sometimes quite poor at learning. So our brains are amazing things, but they actually can be very, very poor at learning. So here's our brain. So I've got one here I can open up. So show that way up. It's actually grey. I've actually seen a picture of a brain. I've actually seen a real brain in a jar, and it is actually a grey colour. It isn't like this sort of nice pinky colour here. We don't have the largest brains on the planet. I think the sperm whale has the largest brains. I think our brains are about the same size as a dolphin, but our brains are particularly good, and probably that's because of our evolutionary pathway. But I won't go into that now. So I'm going to set you a little task. I'm going to get your brains to work. So what I want you to do is I want you to make a sentence using as many of the following words as possible. Okay, so I want you to make one sentence with using as many of the following words as possible. So here are the words: tractor, journalist, expensive, spectacular, wheel, ocean, weather, and red. And you can use joining words, or you can use other words. You can use as many other words as you want. But the winner is the person who uses most of those words. Okay, so if you'd like to have a go at that, and when you've come up with a sentence, if you'd like to type it into the chat window, and we'll see how well your brains are working this morning. Well, see, Sophie, you've got a big challenge ahead of you. Hopefully, this presentation will help. Oh, here you are. The expensive journalist. Oh, expensive journalist. A journalist rode a red, expensive track, spectacularly attracted to the ocean in bad weather. As a journalist, I find that writing articles about spectacular. Okay, I like that one. I like that one, Andrew. Yes. Oh, there's some good wordsmiths here. Like spectacular journalist, turn the wheel in her expensive red tractor as she braves the weather on her way to the ocean. Good. Oh, I'm loving some of these. Excellent. Good. Excellent. Oh, really good. Okay. Excellent. Brilliant. Okay. Well, good. I can test. I'm checking your brains are still awake. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that little exercise a bit later on. Good. It's nice to see that you're all alive and kicking. So over the centuries, I guess we've always recognized, I think, that the brain, that thing inside our heads, has an important role to play. Everybody from Plato and Aristotle realized that what's in our heads is quite important, but they really had no idea as to why or how it worked. So I thought I wouldn't go back right back to Plato and Aristotle. I thought I'd go back to 1796 and phrenology. So a guy called Franz Joseph Gall came up with the idea, well, maybe different parts of the brain, or in fact the skull, control different things. And they did some research and tried to sort of connect this to reality. So they came up with this idea that they could map the mind. And you can buy some quite nice ones of these in souvenir shops with sort of China ones. I haven't actually got one, but I'm tempted to at some point. But sadly, it's not really quite how things work. So more recently, we have realized that the brain, well, in fact, over the last hundreds of years, people have been cutting up dead bodies and opening up brains and realizing there are different bits to the brain. So they've come across these sort of main areas of the brain now, the lobes and the spinal cord and sort of cerebellum and stuff. So, and we do realize that different bits of those do different things. I also, a chap called Paul MacLean came up as a neuroscientist, came up with this idea of what they call the Triune Brain. So they think maybe the brain evolved so we started out with a sort of reptilian brain and then developed what we call a limbic brain, or an emotional feeling brain, sometimes called a mammalian brain. And then finally we had this sort of human, the sort of thinking brain. And so we think that, in the last sort of, thousands of years, it's the neocortex that really developed way ahead of anything else we had before. So yeah, so in fact this sort of model, it's not exactly clear how it works. How this model of the brain is used in psychology a lot. I work with an organization who work with kids who have behavioral problems in school, and they use this a lot to try and sort of identify, where to try and reel back some of those problems and try and work with the kids. So it's quite a useful model of the brain. But we also have done more research and found that different parts of the brain do different things, and we've identified an area that controls taste, an area for motor control. I mean, it's not completely delineated, so there's usually one area that's working particularly hard, but other areas are supporting it. So it's not just a simple case of this one bit does everything. They've identified that certain areas, are much more active when we're doing certain things. In fact, what's really developed research on this is having something like an MRI scanner. So we're able to actually take slices through the brain and see what happens in the brain when we're doing something. So here's an example of what's happening during hand movement, and comparing those with a disability against those who have a healthy hand. So they're able to work out what sort of things are what sort of changes and differences there are on the brain. But the brain is quite it's quite a complex organic thing. It's not really like a computer. I know it's an analogy we often use, but actually the brain isn't like a computer at all. It's much more complicated. In fact, I think we know more about the moon than we know about our own brains. But for the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus on some key areas that have come out of neuroscience. So one of them is that we are very lazy. So our brains are programmed to be quite lazy. Learning is effortful. So in order to learn something, we have to put a lot of effort in. So much to the disappointment of most of my clients, if we don't get learners to think, they're never going to learn. That's probably why there's such a challenge doing compliance training. Connection on context trump content. So recognizing why you need to learn something is much more important than the actual stuff you need to learn. Emotion is important. We talked about the Triune Brain. So clearly, right in the heart of our brain is that reptilian and mammalian core. So when it comes to learning, we also need to tap into that part of our brains. And finally, something quite simple, probably something we all probably take for granted. Practice makes perfect. Good. So first of all, we are lazy learners. So where possible, we don't learn new stuff, but we rely on what we already know. So basically, we'll keep on doing stuff we've already done rather than learn new stuff. And actually, that's one of the big challenges of learning, because when a client comes to me and they say, oh, they're not doing it right. So what they want is to change behavior. And that can be really challenging because the brains are really good at just doing the same stuff again and again. I don't know if you ever read a book by Julie Dirksen called Design for How People Learn. It's in my reading list at the end. She talks in there about the elephant and the rider. It's a concept and model from psychology. That basically the conscious mind, actually the biggest part of our brain, that cortex, neocortex, that's the biggest part. But actually, it's the other bit, that the reptilian and the mammalian brain that often take control first. So it's that emotional response, that sort of behave, that sort of I'll do what I did last time. So when we're trying to teach people, actually we're trying to tap into the conscious mind, and that can be a challenge. There's a great book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by Daniel K. Kahneman, and he talks about system 1 being the thinking fast system, so that's the instinctive emotional, and system 2 being thinking slow, the analytical and the logical. And actually, when we're trying to teach people things, we're often trying to tap into that thinking slow system, but we need to be aware. We need to work with the thinking fast system as well. If we fail to do that, then actually what we're trying to teach people, people won't change. Yeah, so the elephant and the rider, it's quite a nice analogy. And Julie Dirksen uses it really well in her book. I definitely recommend Design for How People Learn. So who's there having to design some new e-learning this summer? I think it was Sophie. I definitely recommend Julie Dirksen's book. So also, the brain is very good at forgetting. This is Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve. So Ebbinghaus did an experiment, years ago, on trying to memorize. Actually, he's trying to memorize three sets of 3 groups of letters, meaningless groups of letters that didn't mean anything, like FTC. They didn't have any meaning. And he tried to see how long he could remember them for. And then he sort of plotted. And what he worked out was, he forgot them quite quickly unless he continually practiced remembering them. And it's used as a basis for why space practice is important. But space practice doesn't really. It's okay for learning, like maybe when you're learning a new language, you want to learn new words. Duolingo is a great tool at doing that, but it's not very good for learning more complicated things like how to manage a project. But what it does show is our brains are really, really good at forgetting things, and our brains need to be good at forgetting things, because every day we're bombarded with new information on our way to work. Well, maybe not on our way to work today, but normally every day we're bombarded with lots of new information. So we can't retain all of that. We have to selectively store stuff for reuse, and we'll look at that again shortly. So our brains are really good at forgetting stuff, and if they didn't, we'd find life much more difficult. I think there is actually a condition where people have a sort of photographic memory. They remember everything visually, like a photograph. I can imagine what that's like. If I go on holiday, I have maybe a couple of memories of the holiday, and that's enough for me. So the brain is lazy, but we'll come back to that later. So learning is effortful. So in order to actually learn something, we need to think about it. We need to apply some effort. So I'm just going to run you through. This is the sort of the cognitive neuroscientist's simple model of the sort of how memory works. So on the left-hand side, we have our sensory inputs from our 5 senses. So that goes into what they call sensory memory. And most of that then is chucked away again. So when we go for a walk, we see lots and lots of things. We sight, smells, and we meet people. All of that we all have those senses, but most of that's thrown away again. But if we pay attention to something, it goes into our. So most of that sensory information is lost. But if we pay attention to something, then it goes into our short-term memory. So we think about something. I must remember when I get home to do something. So we think we do that. That goes into short-term memory, and in short-term memory we can rehearse it, so we can keep thinking about it. We can sort of do lots of different things to sort of help us to remember it. So short-term memory lasts a bit longer than sensory memory, but even then, most of what goes into our sensory memory is ultimately lost. So then the only thing that goes into long-term memory is something we've actually encoded. So when we talk about learning, we're talking about effectively encoding. And so then that goes into long-term memory. And then it's much more likely that we're going to be able to recall it at some point in the future. But even long-term memory will lose things over time. Although it's quite surprising, most researchers we actually remember a whole lot of weird different things, and we don't remember we've remembered them. So I don't know, you've been in a pub quiz and somebody asks you, who sang this song, and you remember it, or what football team played this match in '82, and for some reason you know the answer, and you're able to recall it at a long-term memory. So it's quite amazing how we're able to store even those sort of not so trivial facts away and bring them out when we're given the right cue. So it's quite an interesting. Our memories are quite powerful and quite interesting. But we've got to work with that memory. So actually, we have our sensory inputs. They go into our short-term memory, which is really, really tiny. There's about I think you can remember what they can do, 5 or 7 things, but even then, we quickly forget those things. So our job as learning designers is to try and put whatever's in short-term memory into long-term memory. And I've tried to replicate that here with this slide. So the long-term memory is a massive maze of complicated connections and wiring. So getting something in there is quite tricky. But once you get it in, then the chances are you'll be able to retrieve it at some point in the future. So long-term memory consists of neuroscientists tell us, consists of different types of memory. So they have what we call sort of explicit, what they call declarative memory. So things like semantic memory, so facts, concept, ideas are in semantic memory. But also we have those episodic memories. So we go on holiday and we have an experience. We remember that experience. Remember we were sailing and something happened. Those experiences are in our episodic memory. They're like almost like photographic, and we can sort of recreate them. We actually don't remember. We don't actually remember the visual. We're able to recreate it on the fly using our episodic memory. And then finally, we have procedural memory. So that's motor and cognitive skills, and also things that we do without really understanding them. So some things we're good at, we find it very hard to explain why we're good at them. Mainly because we got so good at them, we're unable to break down. So what we need to do in order to teach somebody else those skills is to try and break them, is to make the tacit explicit. So one thing we hear a lot more, if you're a learning designer or instructor designer, a lot more about experience design. So I think experience design is almost trying to sort of put together the semantic and the episodic to try and sort of create a learning experience which has a bit of both. It's a nice idea, but actually I think quite challenging in practice. Procedural memory, well, as I said, that's quite hard to teach. We may need to use a proxy like scaffolds or other ways of helping to teach something that we know so well that we find it very hard to teach other people how to do it. So I'm just going to talk now a bit about knowledge representations. So the cognitive neuroscientists, are big on how we represent knowledge in our brains. So the simplest representation is a string or label. So for example, we might learn that there's a country called Australia. So you might teach your 4-year-old that you might teach your 4-year-old all the countries of Europe. So they'll remember maybe with spaced practice what the countries in Europe are, but they'll have no other idea beyond the fact that they know the countries. They won't know anything about the countries, or won't be able to do anything with that knowledge. They can simply remember a list of countries. But beyond that, one step up is an idea or concept. So for example, you might have an idea of the world, or the Earth. So it's a planet in the solar system. It has oceans. It's round. So that becomes now, and it has different countries in it. So Australia is a country in the world. So that becomes more of a conceptual thing. Yeah, I mean, we probably would say, we'd all now agree probably that the world is round, but there are still people out there who think it's flat. So their concept of the world is quite different to mine. I'm quite happy. I'm quite certain it's round. So even concepts and ideas can go awry in the wrong hands. And so one step up again is schema. So a schema is all the things that we collect together. So we have a schema for the planet. So it consists of oceans. It has gravity. There are different countries. Different people live in different countries. They speak different languages. All that is part of our schema for Earth. And finally, and this is a bit more tricky to sort of describe, our mental models. So that's then how if you were to organize a holiday to travel around the world, it's those tools and things you'd use in order to plan your holiday. So it's taking all of that, those things, those ideas and concepts and those schemas, and then using it to achieve something. Which actually, when we're teaching things in the workplace, what we want to do is build a good mental model. So for example, going back to Georgia, the cleaner, we want to have a good mental model of fighting germs using cleaning techniques. So over time, your mental model builds up. Different schemas contribute to it. And ultimately, so when you talk to an expert, experts generally have very strong mental models. They may not always be, they may sometimes not always be correct, but they're very, very strong. So when you talk to an expert, they're usually using a well-tried and tested mental model. Yeah, so schemas are quite interesting. They're used a lot in psychology, actually. So for example, we'll have a schema of a bird. So a bird has feathers, beaks, and talon and wings. So if there's something else that has feathers, beak, talon, and wings, well, that's probably a bird. Sometimes we can go all wrong. That it may be a dinosaur, but actually it has the same sort of attributes. So then we need to update our schema. So schemas are quite interesting. When it comes to learning, we need to think about what schemas people already have, and to what extent are we working with or against those schemas. Something I've been thinking about a lot more recently. It's hard to see what people's schemas are. even harder to see what their mental models are, but having the idea that they have one is useful. For example, they think with stereotypes. So stereotypes come out of schemas. So if you have a stereotype of somebody from Africa, you know, that's probably a broken schema. So if you want to break that down, you need to refresh that person's schema. Yeah, quite interesting. Think about schemas as learning designers. So yeah, just going to also give a brief example. So talking through what does, I mean, these are very conceptual things. These are abstract ideas, but they're worth sort of working with, especially if you're designing learning for other people. So we have a string. So that could be tire pressures. So somewhere in our car are stored the pressures for the tires. But then we have the idea or concept of a tire. So a tire is something which has a hard center, some rubber, and some air in it. So probably one of the most important things we have from a tire is it has air in it, and if there's no air, then that could be a problem. Then we have a schema. So a car, we have a schema of a car. So a car has four wheels, 4 tires. They all need to have enough air for it to work. So if we get a flat tire, we go, oh, so we use our mental model to think, well, what can I do? Well, the tire needs to have air in it. It looks like there's no air in that tire. What can I do? So maybe I can put air back in it. Oh, so I try and put some air back in, but it doesn't go up. Well, maybe I can fix the tire. Maybe I can squeeze something in to fix the tire. Maybe I can replace the tire with another wheel in the boot. So we start to use those things to deal with the situation. That's just a very simple example. So for example, we all have a mental model of how to fix our cars. So, but if you're a mechanic, you have a really good mental model of how to fix your car. You know, if my car doesn't work, I can open the bonnet and check a few things, and that's it. I think, well, it's not working, it's not starting. Is it because I've got no fuel? Is the battery flat? That's about as far as my mental model goes. But a mechanic will go, well, there's definitely fuel. What about the fuel filter? Have you checked the ignition? You know, a mechanic will have a much stronger mental model, and therefore be able hopefully to get you on the road again. Good. Okay, so I'm now going to test out. I'm going to test out one of your schemas. So what I'd like you to do now, for the next couple of minutes, is I'd like you to draw a bike from memory. No cheating, no looking on Google, because I can't see you. Normally, you know, we're doing this in a room or a theater. So I want you to draw a bike from memory, make it as accurate as you can, and include all the key working parts, including a saddle, because that makes you more comfortable. So, okay, go ahead. Please go and draw yourself a bike from memory. Make it as accurate as you can. There's a link there to Eric Kandel. I'm going to follow while you're drawing your bikes. I'm going to follow that link. Oh, that Eric Kandel link looks interesting. I'll follow that up on that one later. Good. So normally I embarrass lots of people at this point and get them to share their lovingly drawn bikes. Sadly, on this webinar, we can't quite do that. But if you want to, after this presentation, want to take a little photograph of your bike and share it on Twitter or on LinkedIn or somewhere, and then give it the hashtag eLN event, and add the eLN Twitter handle. That'd be quite nice. Quite nice to see some of your bikes. Yeah, thank you, Joan. Yeah, so maybe that's something I can look forward to. A prize for the most accurate, and a prize for the funniest. Actually, the funny ones are my favorite. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a bit. So here are some we prepared earlier. So this is Carla's bike. So these are drawn by kids. But I quite like Carla's bike. It's got a really comfy saddle, and she's got most of it right. But for some reason, the chain is going from the pedal to the frame. But you know, she got most of the key bits there. Oops. And here's Jane's bike, age 7. So yeah, so Jane's got the pedals attached to the saddle, but she has got a nice big chain going from the front wheel to the back wheel. So I quite like that. So you can see how people have got the different elements, but they're in the wrong place. So that's you know, that's so that's good that they remember the elements. And then here's Serena. So she's forgotten the chain altogether, but pedals attached to the saddle. So that's quite nice. And then finally, there's one here by Mark, and yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I wish my bike looked as good as that. Yeah, that's perfect. Actually, a lot of people struggle when they draw a bike. The sort of the geometry of the frame. It's basically 2 triangles, as Mark has shown there. Yeah. Anyway, hopefully that was useful exercise. Hopefully that's updated your schema on bikes. So in coding, actually taking notes is really helpful for encoding. So I know in eLearning we don't sort of make a big play on notes, but I'm a big fan of actually encouraging people to take notes. Hopefully some of you even now are taking notes. So note taking is definitely, there's actually quite a lot of books now written in the education sector about how note taking helps. So it's something it's really worth encouraging. I particularly like things like mind mapping or also sketchnoting. I taught my son while I was at university to mind map, and it made a big difference to him. Because he was struggling with just writing down just written notes, and he found them hard to revise from. Whereas making mind mapping helped encode it better. When it came to revision time, it was much more useful to revise from those. Good. Okay, so one really good quote I think I've been using quite a lot is memory is the residue of thought. You remember what you think about, not what you're told about. And that's from Daniel Willingham, he's a cognitive scientist. So he's written a really good book called Why Students Don't Like School. So that's in my reading list at the end. So I definitely think you remember what you think about, not what you're told about. So if we don't get our learners to think, they're never going to learn. And so the next thing I'm going to cover is connection and context. So connection and context trump content. We still need the content, because without the content, we don't have anything to work with. So I use a very simple instructor design model called the ADC, Absorb, Do, Connect. It's from a book called eLearning by Design by William Horton. It's a bit of a Bible. It's quite thick, but I really picked this up years ago now, and I've used it a lot in my courses, and it's been really, really valuable. Initially, I thought they were all, well, I thought initially the most important was absorb, followed by do, followed by connect. But over time, I've come to realize that the most important one is connect. If you connect with your learners, so connect with them personally, emotionally, and with the context, so why are they needing to learn, then actually it's much easier to do the absorb and the do. So over the years, I've realized connection and context are much more important than content. We still need the content. So that you know, we still need the content, but we need to position the content, in the context and connection with the learner. And the big thing here is connecting with prior learning. So people already know stuff. What we really got to do as learning designers is think, well, you know, how can we find out what they already know? How can our learning design tap into what they already know? And that in some ways taps into their schemas and also taps into their mental models. So we need to try and sort of try and surface some of those things before we try and teach people new stuff. I like this idea. You know, I mean, I came across this sort of conscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence years ago, and I think it's worthwhile revisiting. So basically, you know, when we start out, we don't know, we don't even know what we don't know. So we have to build awareness as we go through, and at the top level, we reach mastery. But prior learning is really important as we go through those steps. So okay, if you've got somebody right at the bottom, then you can use instructor design to teach them basics. But as you move up that staircase, you need to think about what they already know, and then teach them. You know, so what you teach them connects into what they already know. The concept, the analogy I like is like, you know, long-term memory is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So when we introduce something new, people will try and connect it to what they already know. What I'm talking about today, all of you already know quite a lot about learning design or instructor design or different topics. So what you're doing is you're connecting. Well, what is John talking about today? How does that connect with what I already know? So depending on what you already know, you'll go away with different, what I call aha moments. So, I think the jigsaw analogy is quite good. So if we have to make a jigsaw, there's certain bits we put together, you know, because there's a face, we can make that, but then there's gaps in the middle. We can maybe make up something else and it doesn't quite fit. So it just exists as an island, but then eventually we connect it to another part of the puzzle. I think that's a really nice analogy of how the brain works. We're constantly looking at new pieces to see whether they fit in somewhere else or whether they need to start a new section of the puzzle, which then later on may connect up somewhere else. So yes, this idea of prior knowledge. So I think when we try to teach something new, then we present some new knowledge to a learner, and they only go away with a portion of that knowledge. So today, after this presentation, depending what you already know, you'll go away with hopefully some new learning, but you won't have remembered or taken in everything I've talked about. You know, that would be pretty much impossible. However, if you already know a lot more, if you're already a fairly qualified, practiced instructor designer, you already know a lot more. Some of the concepts I've mentioned, you already be familiar with. So then what I'm talking about, a lot more will be encoded. So that's the paradox of learning is actually, you know, the more you know, the more you're able to learn. So I love this quote. My son was a big fan of Homer Simpson, and he had this quote, you know, he had a mug which said, "Every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain." So that was Homer Simpson's view of the world. So if we learned one new fact, one old fact had to go out. But I actually more believe in Leonardo da Vinci. So actually, you know, he was a great example where his you know, he just learned about science, about art, about engineering, about architecture. Basically, you know, and the more he learned, the more he was able to learn. So how do we help make the connection? Well, we can use real world examples. So for example, I'm designing an online first aid course. So one thing to do is we show what's actually in your first aid kit. So a real world example, what's in the first aid kit. Analogies, so we use the jigsaw puzzle. They can be helpful to try and help people learn stuff. Models or scaffolds, so I don't know if you learned about me from school. I still remember the water cycle, even though I'm not a water engineer. Or scenarios and simulations. So in eLearning, they're very popular because they actually put people in situations. So that's another nice way of making that connection. So the other thing I want to talk about now, there's two more to go. So care to learn. So to what extent is role does emotion play in learning? Well, we saw that the Triune Brain earlier on. So clearly, you know, it's an important part of the way we view and respond to the world. So forgetting emotion altogether is quite hard. So we do use emotion quite a bit in things like marketing, in public health, awareness. So emotion does have a key role to play in learning. If people care, they're much more likely to want to learn, especially if it cares and it matters to them. Something we've come across recently is a thing called effective context. And Nick Shackleton-Jones talks a lot about effective context, and probably goes, I'd say, a bit over the top with the idea. So his belief is that people only learn through emotion. It's a great video to watch, actually. It's almost 10 years old, that video. By the way, I'm going to share these slides at the end of this talk. So probably a bit late to tell you that, but I hope you've been making notes. So you'll get a copy of these slides and you can follow that link. A really good video about effective context, and his book, How People Learn. So yeah, Nick's belief is that we need to really give somebody a memorable experience and then they'll learn. I think that's important, but I don't think it's the only thing at play. Another thing is can be useful in emotion is storytelling. So probably as learning designers, you come across storytelling quite a bit. So storytelling is a, you know, not only gets across facts, but also taps into people's emotions and feelings. So I think storytelling is a good tool if you're trying to get people to care about your learning. However, stories don't do detail. So often stories have a sort of a simple message. People often don't remember the detail. They can watch a movie and sort of tell you the sort of the key plot line, but forget all the details. So stories aren't so good at doing the detail. And also stories can fail to see different viewpoints. There's a great video, TED Talk by this lady. She's from Nigeria. Talks about how stories can quite easily give you the wrong, the wrong viewpoint. Okay, so the final point is practice makes perfect. So I love this quote from Gandhi: "An ounce of practice is worth more than a ton of preaching." So I'm definitely a big believer in that. Not space practice though. I think space practice has a role if you're learning a new language. Then I think, you know, Duolingo and its approach is really, really solid. So I think space practice has a role to play for certain low levels of learning, but I wouldn't try and teach people to be project managers using it. Probably real practice is much better. So generally, when we talk about designing a learning intervention, we design learning intervention in order to encourage practice. So people then go into the workplace, they practice that, they get a bit better at it, and then we do a bit more. We do another learning intervention to move more up, going up those steps from unconscious incompetence to conscious competence. So we will go through that cycle quite a few times. So the learning intervention just encourages people to maybe experience something differently. But people really learn when they practice. So when I run an ID course, I say, you're not going to learn on this course. You're going to learn as soon as you start storyboarding after the course. If you don't start doing that, you'll never learn. Deliberate practice is even better. So a really good book I recommend is a book called Peak by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. So they talk about actually the real experts practice deliberately. So we can keep going, we can keep delivering PowerPoint presentations, we can keep running projects the way we always used to, because as I said at the start, the brain is quite lazy. We can keep doing it the way we always used to, but it's much better to think, well, what is it that what is here? What could I improve? And in order to do that, we normally need a coach. So a coach or a teacher to help us identify what it is that we need to improve, and then you work on that. So and that concept of deliberate practice, I think, is really, really powerful. So just to summarize, so we are lazy learners. So we try and avoid learning if we can help it. We need to put effort in to learn. So we need to help motivate people to make that effort. Connection and context trump content. So using my ADC model, I now focus a lot more on the connect than on the absorb and do. Once I'm clear on the connect, I can then work on the absorb and the do. Caring to learn, so tapping into people's emotions is really important, whether you use storytelling or some other approach. And also practice makes perfect. So not spaced repetition, but actual practice or deliberate practice. And so actually, I've come to think more recently that a lot of this, if you tie all these things together, a lot we're learning now about cognitive neuroscience, and also, you know, about the theories of learning. So I think you're seeing a lot more talk these days about learning experience design, and so I've done a lot more research recently on what exactly is learning experience design, and a lot of people have different ideas of it. But I quite like this sort of view from Margaret Viegel. And she said it brings together instructional design, educational pedagogy, design thinking, cognitive neuroscience, and UX UI. There's a lot in there. I think that in some ways that recognizes the challenge of being a good experience designer. But I think that sort of makes sense to me. Actually, moving one step on from structure design towards experience design, then using some of the research out of cognitive neuroscience is going to be an important part of our learning journey. So, what did you learn in the last 30 minutes? I don't know. Hopefully something. You had hopefully a few aha moments. So I'm not a big fan of learning outcomes. I think when we create a learning intervention, people will have some aha moments during that learning intervention, and they'll take those away and hopefully apply those things in practice. So hopefully there you had some aha moments. The other thing, how many words can you remember from the exercise earlier on? So if you'd like to type into the chat window, how many words can you remember from that exercise we did earlier on? 12. Oh, no. Okay. I wanted to type them in. All of them. Was that all of them, Dominic? Good. I mean, the chances are, if you crafted a wonderful sentence, you're going to remember that sentence much, much longer than you would remember the individual words. So the point there was you temporarily created some sort of connection between those words. And that's much more memorable. You're much more likely to encode that for a longer period of time. Good, they are the words in case you forgot them. So learn more. So there's, I know there's a lot of reading there. So there's 8 books I recommend. So top left is Daniel William. That's a really good, recommend that. Bottom right is Julie Dirkson's Design for How People Learn. So she talks about the rider and the elephant. And also there's some other books there too. So actually Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn is also a very good book. A bit more like a textbook, but really good. You may have come across John Medina's Brain Rules before. That's not about learning. It's just generally about how our brain works. Generally, that's quite a nice book. So yeah, so I recommend all of those. If you're struggling to find something to do in lockdown. So I'll quite like this final quote. So yeah, so I think I'm a believer in the Leonardo da Vinci view rather than the Homer Simpson view. That's it. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you, hopefully, for learning. I'm on Twitter, and as I said, we're really nice if you share your bicycle pictures on Twitter. If you're too embarrassed, don't. But yeah, it'd be nice for Joan and I to see them. Also help promote the eLN.
Mine's up there, yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, John. That was really good. Could you stop sharing your screen for a minute and I'll just pull up the website?
Absolutely.
Just to finish us off.
So as I said, I'll create a PDF, Joan, and send you the PDF of the slides.
That's great. Yeah, and then we'll get them up there. So there we go. Just make sure I'm on the right window. So I just wanted to share with you the eLN website for anybody who's not currently a member. It's just elearningnetwork.org. We are a not-for-profit community interest group, so that everything we do is for the benefit of the membership. And the annual membership fee is just £29 a year because we don't need a lot of money to run it. We're all volunteers. So if you go on that homepage, you'll see that we are running lots and lots of events at the moment during lockdown. Some of them are meetings and they're quite intimate, so we've got a cap on numbers and they are for members only. But we also have a number of webinars all lined up as well, such as one of the Gold Award winners from Learning Technologies last year. We've got a drop-in session with Junction 18. These are mainly industry partners who support the eLN and help us to run it. So I think, unless anybody's got anything else to add, I'd just like to thank you again, John, for your time. Might see you at next week's, 2 weeks' time, the drop-in coffee morning again on the 3 weeks, the 21st. Yeah, no, I'm going to drop in I'll drop in on the coffee morning. And I've already run the evaluation poll. Sorry, I got that up a bit early. But thanks to everybody for joining. Hope to see you at another event soon. And we will wind up the session now. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Joan. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good rest of the week.